What's up, everyone? We just wanted to let you know that this February, we are celebrating Black History Month all month long.
Every week, we will be focusing on a different piece of Black history as it relates to creators in film and literature.
So let us know if there's one you want to hear about, if there is a piece that is near and dear to you, something that you think maybe we would like to know. Please get in contact with us at ILLITERATE on Instagram.
And let us know what you want to hear. All right, on to this week.
Welcome, everyone. This is ILLITERATE. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a book this week.
I watched a movie. This week, we are covering, for Black History Month, the illustrious Shaft franchise. This is going to be the coolest episode we've ever done, Taylor. Our chill is
Shaft.
on 9. Shaft! We are covering the amazing Shaft franchise starting in 1971. They had a recent entry into the franchise in 2019 with several sequels along the way. Guess what? It's based on a book. It's one of the most influential Black pieces of media, and we are going to uncover the veil here today.
Like Evan said, came out summer of 71, released by MGM, and it helped them, as the lore goes, get out of financial ruin. It was one of only 3 successful films of theirs that year.
Good Lord.
And it started the blaxploitation genre, which we'll talk about. Made it also the first for many things in Black Hollywood, the first Black action hero.
It's the kindling that got it all going.
The first Black studio director, many other things. Jumping right in, where is this sitting in film history and literature history? The detective genre, huge in the 60s. Paul Newman as Harper, Frank Sinatra in Tony Rome. And then he's also in, we talked about this in our Die Hard thing, The Detective was that first book. That was what Die Hard. Dirty Harry's going to come out in 71. So that's what's popping.
Getting into the 70s, we're looking at a particular African-American answer to the genre.
And directed by very famous photographer Gordon Parks, who we mentioned in our Lovecraft Country episode, because of a lot of the iconography and visuals they used for that show were directly pulled from his famous photographs. So I wanted to start with a profile on him, since I knew nothing about him except for that, and how he came to be the director of this iconic film. Are you ready?
I'm so ready. I'm primed.
Here we go. He was born not alive. He was stillborn.
Whoa.
No heartbeat, was declared dead and put aside as an infant. This is 1912 in Kansas. Another doctor, though, had an idea and immersed him in ice water, which caused his heart to start beating.
Oh my gosh.
That doctor was named Dr. Gordon, who saved his life, so he was named after that doctor, and he became Gordon Parks.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And he lived 93 years after that and was a famous photographer, filmmaker, poet, music composer as well.
One of the pioneers that would be pioneers for the Black community.
He, just some of the prejudices against him. There was a school teacher who said to the all-Black class that he was in, "You'll all wind up porters and maids." He remembers that vividly from his autobiography.
Oh my God.
He was thrown into a river to drown at 11 years old by a bunch of other white 11-year-old boys.
Oh my God.
His mom died when he was 14, and so then was moved to his aunt's house in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then they turned him out on the street at 15.
Oh my God.
So he had many odd jobs, was homeless, was a piano player at a brothel, eventually became a porter, and said, I can't be this. His mom, in his autobiography, his mom told him, quote, "What a white boy can do, you can do too, and no excuses." And he was like, I'm not gonna be any of this, what they think I am capable of. So at 25 years old, he bought a used camera from a pawn shop and taught himself how to take photographs. The quote from him on this, he said, "It was to become my weapon against poverty and racism."
Wow.
And so he leaned into it wholeheartedly. Photography is what he's most known for. I loved this chain of events of him building his reputation because he just was practicing on his own and got the film developed. And the film developer told him to seek a fashion assignment at a woman's store in Minneapolis because they saw his photographs and said, "Oh, these are good. You should do something with this."
Wow.
So he does that fashion assignment, and then those photographs caught the eye of Marva Lewis, who was the wife of the boxing champ Joe Lewis at the time.
Oh, really?
And so then she reached out to him and she said, "You got to move to Chicago and photograph things there. Like, this isn't where it's happening. Go there." So then he moved there and began photographing society women and the
Well, I
African
guess I
American
will.
experience. He moved there with his wife and then got a fellowship in Chicago, which then got him to be asked to join the Farm Security Administration, which was chronicling the nation's social conditions at the time because of the
Wow.
Great Depression. So he traveled all around.
So
As a part
on
of
that
that,
suggestion, he moves and immediately finds traction.
mhm,
Wow.
yeah, he's that good.
She was right.
But starting even from the from before that, from the film, the guy developing film at the at the drugstore or
Yeah,
whatever.
man.
So these folks are pushing him along. One of the things, the famous photo, which I'll post a link to, which got him the most praise and criticism, was it's called American Gothic, Washington, D.C. And it was a part of this Farm Security Administration. It was in their building in D.C. And this gal, Ella Watson, was one of the cleaning crew. And like the famous American Gothic painting that has the old white farm couple and they got the pitchfork and the barn in the background.
Hmm.
This is this black woman who, like I said, was a part of the cleaning crew, and she's got a mop and a broom, and it's the American flag behind them because he was seeing all the
Oh,
racism that was going on in D.C. when he was working there.
wow.
And this is in the 40s, so this
Yeah.
is very, very against what people would think he should be photographing or statements that he should be making.
That's exactly why he
Um,
has to do it.
yeah,
If anybody's
yeah.
telling you that's you can't take no, that's exactly what needs documented. That's exactly what needs
Mhm.
something commented on. It needs to be put out there to be said about.
Because who else is going to take a picture of Ella Watson?
Are you
You
saying
know,
she doesn't,
in the
are you saying that didn't happen, didn't exist? That's essentially when to turn the other eye. I mean, essentially, when you're talking about art form, and then in the 40s, today we live in the information age where I send a photo to 12 people right now from my pocket. It's there. It's this is weaponized. The
Mhm.
power of the press, the power of the media. I mean, these if you can get traction, it's a big deal because there are not very
Mhm.
many avenues in which to get it out there.
And like we said with his quote, it was to become my weapon against poverty and
Exactly.
racism. So he's using it for that. He moved to the Office of War Information because World War II is happening, and he photographed the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen, which
Wow.
we talked about.
Yes.
I don't know in what episode, but we mentioned
We
them. Maybe in
definitely
our
did. We
Harriet Tubman
absolutely
episode.
did.
Yeah, yeah. And then he moved to the Standard Oil Photography Project in New Jersey, where he's photographing small towns and industrial centers in the late 40s. So he's just all over the country honing his craft. In 1944, he's continuing to do like he started with the fashion photography. He becomes the only black photographer for Vogue in 1944,
Oh my gosh.
and then in 48 becomes the first black photographer at Life magazine, which is
This is
hard. Like Evan
huge.
was saying, oh, I can post a picture to 12 people, but like this is the most prestigious magazine,
Yeah,
and
this is
especially
huge.
for photography, this is
Yeah,
how
this is
people
as a
saw.
photographer, I don't know that you could I mean, what is at that at that point in time, what is a higher achievement almost? I mean, my god.
Than Life magazine, and he worked for
Yeah.
them for over 20 years, over 300 assignments.
It's a dream come true now. To just to
Mhm.
be clear, it's a like that's an amazing thing now, but that role as it stacks against the information and technology that is around us all the time and in our pockets, that role compared now looks, oh, that's a neat job. In 1948, there's nothing out there like it. This is, I mean, this is a absolute dream come true. It's really important to contextualize exactly like how big and how fast this all happened.
He kept doing. He had over 300 assignments with them, a lot of which were places and actions that people did not want to photograph, but he did anyway. So he reported on segregation in Alabama in 56, the Nation of Islam movement in the 60s, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
One of his photo essays was titled How It Feels to Be Black, because white people had no idea how Black Americans
Yeah.
lived. And so a lot of his stuff is not just the boycotts and the brutality, but all the details of people's inner lives. There was a famous, I'll post a link to all this stuff, but there was a 56 photo essay titled The Restraints, Open and Hidden. And that was like where a lot of the Lovecraft Country iconography
Mm.
comes to, is seeing
Yeah.
what it actually looks like in that time period if you're black.
This is bringing to
Um,
mind Loving, the couple.
mhm,
And if you aren't familiar with Loving, that it's an amazing story about a interracial couple facing prejudice from the government. Life magazine comes to document them and put their photographs out for the world to see, and it's an
mm,
amazing. It's one of the best examples of I think what a photographer does and why they do it.
yeah.
If that job seems a little bit distant to you, or if it's just pretty pictures. I mean, the scene in Loving does, I think, really illustrates very beautifully and very quietly what an amazing photographer. I think he's played by Michael Shannon. But it makes me think of Parks here, evoking that what a fantastic photographer does,
Mhm.
and how that job works, and why they tell the stories they tell.
And he continues not just in photography, but at the opening of the show, I said he was all these other things as well. So he branches out into writing, and he wrote a novel called The Learning Tree, which came out in 1969, and it is an autobiographical account. But it's a novel; it's fictionalized, but covering his rough Kansas childhood and all the stuff that went on in the early 1900s.
Mm.
And so, if you hate reading, Warner Brothers expressed interest in it, and he made the stipulation that he would be the one to direct it because he knows how to move in circles and be the
Yeah.
guy in the scene. And so
Oh yeah.
he became the first African American to direct a film for a major studio.
Wow.
That's also on his
I mean,
claim to
but and
fame.
and look at that, by just stating the humanity of it. I can direct this because I've been, and I can show you why. That's it.
Mhm. And it's his life. Like I said, it's based on his life. So they also shot back in Fort Scott, Kansas, where he grew up, which is also crazy. So I'll post a link to the trailer for that. But that if you were interested in his life and his upbringing, there is a literal film about it that he
Wow.
made
Oh my
about his
gosh.
life. The interesting thing also, he's multifaceted. He, like I said, he wrote it because it was his story. He also scored it, did the music for it,
Oh my gosh.
and hired 9 black crew members to be involved, which was insane for the time as well, even though it's the 60s. But it's like there was nobody on even
Right.
on the
There
crew.
none. Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. That's huge.
Like you said, he opens the gates for this, and within a year, Melvin Van Peebles, who we'll get to him at the end with black exploitation, he directs a film for Columbia. So another director the very next year
Oh
in the
man.
game.
So the door is
Um,
opening. Wow. That's God.
mhm.
That's
And
so
then
fast that stuff happens.
And then the next thing he gets to direct is Shaft in 1971.
Wow.
But where does it seems like a complete shift in tone and style and subject matter, you
Yeah.
know. He's doing this autobiographical thing called The Learning Tree about his time in rural Kansas, and then you've got Shaft coming
He's gonna
in.
be an inner city cop.
Yeah,
The coolest inner city cop to ever walk the
yeah. The
streets.
sexiest, yeah. Takes no nonsense cop. So where does Shaft come from?
Yeah, because this is a larger than life character. It did, and it's so interesting to see how these things get amalgamated from different people and different things. But this is coming from a particular place here.
So here's the story with this. I looked into it and I try to do as much research as I can, corroborating from multiple places. And on the Wikipedia page for Shaft, it says that originally the Shaft character was white. And then I went and found the book that it came from, and it's not so then I stopped looking in that book. And then I looked in other places, and there was some other articles that said that, but it's not true.
It's not
And I don't
true.
know, it's not true. So I don't know where that came from, but I think perhaps so what the deal is, what is true is that the writer of the book Shaft was white,
Oh, and
which is
okay,
equally as
okay.
fascinating. But
There's
he
still
wrote
yeah. There's almost equal question there, but it's definitely not what's being presented.
right. Shaft was always what he is, but the author, Ernest Tidyman is his name. Um, was a
So
former New
cool.
York Times reporter. Yeah. One of the quotes from him, so he's not totally off base, he said, "The idea came out of my awareness of both social and literary situations in a changing city," because he lived in New York for so
Mm,
long. He said,
yeah.
"There are winners, survivors, and losers in the New York scheme of things. It was time for a black winner, whether he was a private detective
Mm.
or an obstetrician." So
Oh,
he did
I like
have
that. Yeah.
the onus on it. Detroit, Houston. He was a police reporter. He was a journalist. He worked in men's magazines. He did it all. Ended up in Manhattan. I found a quote from him that was very similar to the quote with Gordon Parks about pictures. And
Mm.
Ernest Tidyman said, "Words are a licensed weapon, and I never pull them out on people who aren't good adversaries."
Ah.
He makes the same distinction about your craft being the weapon that you use
Yes.
on people. I
Yes,
thought was
yes, yes.
fascinating. They both had that mentality. And this character Shaft that he came up with is not the first black detective, and not even in film. Like there was a notable Sidney Poitier did Virgil Tibbs from In the Heat of the Night in
Mhm.
'65,
Mhm.
but nothing like Shaft. He was this gentlemanly
Right.
character that didn't embody the same power that Shaft has. So here's how it got put together. '68, there was this editor from Macmillan, Alan Rinsler, who he was the one that came up with the idea for a black detective hero. And he sent this idea to this literary agent, Ron Hobbs, who was the only African American literary agent in New York City,
Hmm.
thinking he was going to get an African American writer, but this guy suggested this white writer, Ernest Tidyman. He had written a novel called Flower Power, which was about this runaway girl who joins a hippie camp, and it did poorly
Perfect. That's
because he was just
perfect. Get
trying
him
to
on
catch
Shaft.
he was just trying to catch with the zeitgeist of the time. But he wrote a sample chapter, got the job,
Appreciate
finished it in July of '69, and so, like we said, he has kind of a dubious claim on the authenticity of Shaft,
Huh.
but he does have the rich details
Yeah.
of a man struggling in 1970s New York City, and he was in the police
He
beat.
could see wrong and right.
Yeah. He writes it. The book gets passed around and was picked up by MGM, who, like we said, they were struggling financially, looking to
Mhm.
produce a lower budget thing. They signed the deal before the novel even came out. And then that's when they
Whoa.
brought on Gordon Parks to direct. And Gordon Parks really transforms John Shaft from this tortured protagonist to kind of a superhero. Because I read the book, and it's much more like if you
Good.
listen to
Okay.
our Die Hard episode, it's like he is this not that he's struggling, but it's like, he's this mean, dark character with nothing to lose, and really like he's not the same suave, almost in a way what they did to James Bond as well,
Right. Right.
where the original character is much more gritty, and
Grizzle.
then
Yeah.
they bump it up. And this is here the creation of Shaft the movie. He's the first black action hero.
Right.
And who are they going to get to play this person? Well, they got somebody who had never acted
Nobody.
before. They're like Richard Roundtree. He
We
beat
want a
out
sure thing. Pull him up. He's perfect. No, I mean,
he beat out 200 other potential John Shafts. Like we said, his
ooh.
first feature film. Now he's been in, and I counted this up, 74 movies and
Wow.
82 TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, going through the 70s into the 80s, he's a household name after what
Yeah.
happens here. I had no inkling until we started researching this. This was his first role. He was making minimum wage before, like this is really it all starts here. That is out. I've known of Shaft has been in my zeitgeist since I was probably 8 years old, and that's probably not a great thing, but it's true. And so, but John Shaft is such an amazing character. It's hard to imagine that this is handed to a complete unknown, and that from that it explodes. I mean, it's similar. It's king making, like what happens a few years later in Star Wars with all of those stars that I can't
Yeah.
remember right
Oh,
now.
but so one of the people, like we said, he's a nobody. One of the people who wanted to audition, who said, "Give me a chance and I'll do the music," is Isaac Hayes. Um,
Yes,
but they had already cast Richard, so he never even got to audition. But he still kept up his side and was like, "Well, I'll do the music."
boy.
He ends up doing the soundtrack. It won 2 Grammys and an Academy Award for Best Original Song, which he is the first black person in history to win as a composer and the third to win any Oscar.
So that is really and to go back to Parks really breaking down the door for the industry here. There it is. There's your first Oscar for a non-acting representative role. There, this is a technical role. This is and it gave us one of the most iconic scores of cinema history,
We'll put
hands down.
links to the music, yeah. Where he came from, Isaac Hayes. His big song, if you had to pick one, was Soul Man, first performed by Sam and Dave,
Mm,
which I didn't know that.
I
And then he
didn't know
also,
that.
for those that are less culturally inclined, maybe, or more, he voiced a chef in South Park.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a few weeks after the film release, the soundtrack had earned $2 million and gone platinum. Like you said, it's a staple of 70s music.
Absolutely staple and mirror here with Superfly, the underbelly answer to Shaft, where Shaft is the cool cop keeping it together, flying off the handle a little bit. This is the criminal who has it all that is trying to make his final getaway. And this film comes out right after Shaft, and it has an amazing score that also gets nominated for everything and has stood the test of time as one of the most influential scores of all time. Superfly.
Mhm.
I think the score for Superfly almost transcends the film. It can't be overstated what Shaft does and what Gordon Parks did for
Yeah.
African Americans in Hollywood, period.
Yeah. One of the other ones being Hugh Robertson, who edited. He was not for Shaft, but he was the first black editor nominated for an Oscar for Midnight Cowboy. But he was also
Wow.
on this production.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so it all gets made. Like I said, one of only 3 profitable movies for MGM was an astonishing 13 million on a budget of 500,000 to about a million, which is the return is close to 90 million nowadays. The author of the book, who wrote the screenplay as well, he left after the second book / film. And so he wrote more, hoping that MGM would option them, but they didn't. So he wrote 7 Shaft novels in total
Wow.
that are out there. Because what was interesting when you're talking about the character, Ernest was not happy with the politicization of the film.
Hmm.
And I guess they said his feelings was that he had written it as a detective novel, not a Black Power tome, because the plot does focus on these mafia groups, not necessarily race. And there are still these militant groups, but it's more to service the plot. And Shaft is not even really in the mix. Like, he doesn't even live in Harlem. He's outside of it all,
Ugh.
which still goes into the plot of the movie. But he was coming from a place of, this editor told him to write this book, and so he got paid. He didn't have the same visual and
Right.
cultural
Right. Right.
sensibility that the movie does by
Right.
any
Right. Right. It
means.
was time for a black
Um,
man to win, but it wasn't time to totally rewrite the system, I guess,
and he didn't know it. Yeah.
well, but and you know what? I mean, good for him for seeing the door, the door there. I mean, it's obvious the character transcended everybody
Mhm.
there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
to take an exit and go, wow. I mean, he's going to be tied to the rights to it to the end of time.
Mhm.
So
The interesting thing that on the flip side, there's the criticism also to Gordon Parks saying it doesn't deal with black life in serious terms. Like,
mm,
it gets the opposite criticism. Like, it's not serious enough, because Parks had responded to this criticism. He wrote a letter to the editor in the New York Times, said, quote, "Most black critics have lauded the film for its portrayal of Shaft as a strong black hero. I share Riley's desire to see black actors playing roles now assumed by actors such as Jack Nicholson or Dustin Hoffman, but I don't think the choice for black people is limited to either Five Easy Pieces or Step and Fetch It." Which
mm,
just meaning, like, we can be all roles. We don't have to be the most dramatic thing or the most
right.
stereotypical thing. Step and Fetch It was, which was a stage name. He was considered the first black actor to have any successful film career. This is from the 20s and 30s. He was the first black actor to become a millionaire. He played the, quote, laziest man in the world characters, the
Mm,
more harmful tropes. But some people
mhm,
now in modern criticism say it's kind of like a trickster archetype, where it's like, well, he was getting paid. Like, he
right.
was, and even
That's
his
interesting.
uh his character was like, I'm gonna pretend to be the laziest guy, but actually I'm winning in
Right.
this
Yeah.
game. Like, he
Very
was.
interesting, like the conversation that comes up in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. That's almost
Mhm.
exactly what becomes a central conflict there about the musicians, who's playing whose game,
Yeah.
who's getting. That's very interesting.
So this is like, what is this? What does Shaft do as a movement? And we mentioned it already, but black exploitation as a genre, what does that even mean? Derivation of the word exploitation. Well, I didn't really. I mean, I thought I knew what it was, but I guess.
Right. It's definitely one of those. Yeah, I assume.
Yeah.
you know.
The dictionary definition: attempting to succeed financially by exploiting trends, niches, or lewd content, which is usually what it gets lumped into, like Grindhouse, which is the
Ah,
theater
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
But,
yeah.
like, very much just like shock, but it's not necessarily bad. It's more about the perception from the viewers and even the content codes at the time and the cultural presence around it. So like A Clockwork Orange would have been considered an exploitation film in a
Right.
different context. Or like certain films in Europe that are made would be considered an art film, and then certain films that are made in the US would be a horror film, but
Right.
flipped, they're exploitative. So it depends a lot on the perception of the viewers. So blaxploitation came about in the early 70s with Shaft. It was popular for the time, Matt, obviously, because it made a bunch of money and people went to go see it. But it also suffered the backlash for the stereotypes, the questionable motives of making it. But on the plus side, it was also the first in which Black characters and communities are the heroes and the subjects, and not the
Right.
side characters, the victims, or the villains. And if you haven't seen Shaft, and the trend of these things, like Evan said, with Superfly as well, it takes place in urban neighborhoods. It's a bold genre statement, whatever genre it's in, whether it's detective, Western, thriller, all of that, utilizes violence, sex, drugs to provoke the audience. That's the exploitative part of it.
It's like a strange Rorschach test because it's presenting realities. I mean, it really is. These are, to an extent, representations of realities of people who are making this thing, who are writing this. All hands involved. People have lived some parts of these. These are real things, and may be shocking, and it may not be what you think a movie is. That's kind
Or
of the
presented
point.
to the
What do you
extreme.
think about this? What is your reaction to you? Why is that? Why do you have that reaction? To understand, peel back the human element of this, and it's very interesting to see how intrinsic the reaction is to blaxploitation.
Mm-hmm.
Are you acquainted enough here to even get behind the narrative of the film? It's definitely it's quite
Multifaceted, I would say, is the
yes,
way, like you
yes.
said, a Rorschach. It's like, what are you seeing when you put this up on the
Exactly.
screen?
It's hard to sum up. I'm like, the
Mhm.
more I talk about the laws of words, I'm like, it really is. That's the best I can say is like a
Well, and
Rorschach test.
that's where it's like I said, like the paradoxical duality of it, which is why, I mean, I just learned about it this week, so I can't speak authoritatively
And
about it.
that's
But
us
some
every
people,
week, Taylor. And we just
yeah,
got to.
we're just learning along with you. So some people hold that it's like, oh, this is a token of Black empowerment. Look at
Right.
all that it did. And then other people are like, no, it perpetuates white stereotypes about Black people. Where does it fit in the
I've
middle?
had this
Yeah.
conversation. I think I've had a conversation like this about how, where, to just put it in a different context, where Jackie Kennedy stands in feminism. How much good did it do? How much good did she do, opposed to how much opportunity she had? And my argument here is that it you don't win all at once. You don't just out of nowhere have all the answers and everything is just and right and perfect. The people that are in the positions to take these opportunities by the wings, they have to at some level play the game, and it's about exactly what we're talking about with those roles. It's
Yeah.
whose game are you playing? Is this a win for you? Because history is going to be the judge for all of this stuff. So, are you smart enough to take the win where you can get it to inch the front of this war a little bit forward? That's what it's
Well, I
about.
think what's
Claiming
different,
new
yeah.
ground step by step.
And as things progress with blaxploitation, like the thing with Shaft, what I could see that's different is like, instead of glorifying a tough gangster or a pimp, Shaft is the hero who stands up for the Black community. He derides the man, both Black and white. He woos the ladies. He wins at the end, and he's a detective. Versus like, as blaxploitation progresses, you have, like you said, Superfly, the Mac, Willie Dynamite. This was what popularizes the pimp persona, and that's the criticism,
Absolutely,
is
it's the
like,
answer
oh,
to
this
it.
is
Yeah,
to the detriment of the Black community. And it's to the detriment of Black Hollywood, because it's like, what happened after that? Did it get like, Gordon Parks got 9 people on his crew? Like, what happened after that? Did this actually do what it set out to do?
right.
So I thought it was interesting because, so Spike Lee was, I listened to an interview with him. There was a coalition against blaxploitation that helped contribute to the genre's end as well, because people are seeing like, maybe this isn't what we thought it was being anymore. And then Spike Lee was saying the industry was also at a turning point in the mid 70s where Jaws, Star Wars coming out, Black folks are going to go see it. So he's saying, well, they didn't have to make films for a niche anymore, and it would just be this big blockbuster production,
Right.
and we don't have to have these segments that we're making films for specifically.
Mm.
But then it comes back in a way, because in the 80s and 90s, Spike Lee, John Singleton, Alan and Albert Hughes the films Do the Right Thing, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, they focus on Black urban life,
Yeah.
use Black exploitation elements, but the thing they're doing is incorporating criticism of the glorification of the stereotypical behavior
Mm-hmm.
in those films. So that is kind of where it stands. And then the modern homages to it, Quentin Tarantino is notably inspired by it in Jackie Brown. Undercover Brother is a parody, and then Black Klansman, to a degree, one could say, is an homage by Spike Lee. So the sequels, though, this film didn't just stand on its own. It had other things, and that's what Evan has seen. But straight away, they made Shaft's big score and Shaft in Africa, which Gordon Parks composed the music for. And then that was the end of the 70s Shaft trilogy.
I
And then
wish
he
it
came
kept
out with
going. This is gonna be a running theme here with me. But looking back, I'm like, why couldn't we keep going with? What I don't know. I need to go through them all. And I admittedly have not seen the original Shaft. I grew up with the 2000 Samuel L. Jackson version, the John Singleton version. I grew up with that, and it holds a nostalgic place in my heart because of when I saw it. Like I said, I was probably like 8 years old and should not have seen that movie at that time. Don't blame
right.
anybody. It was probably my older brother that gave me the tape or something. But that's what I grew up on. And I've seen now the new sequel to that film, which takes it in a whole different direction, the 2019 Shaft. So this is a generational affair here, folks.
Yeah. Well, for our audience, just so the first three films are characterized by their blaxploitation characteristics, while the fourth installment, the 2000 version, is a more crime thriller. And then the fifth entry, the 2019 version, is a satirical buddy cop comedy, which seems sort of strange. There was also a doomed TV miniseries that got canceled, but we don't even
Oh, I
talk
didn't
about
even know that.
But,
Oh my God.
but this is where it became, but it's kind of interesting how it builds.
The 2000s film, which I recommend highly, it tries to, I guess, contextualize all of the tropes of the originals into a modern day cinema thriller. It presents this character who's no longer a part of the police force, where this bruised and battered woman comes in and says that she's been told to talk to John Shaft and only John Shaft. And he tries to blow her off. Here's my lieutenant that we've gotten to, tries to give him to her. No. John Shaft is right here. And we get this idea that after she tells her story, just a bit of her story, that there's no way he's not going to help this woman. And that probably is his lot in life going forward, whether he rejoins the police force, or opens up his own PI, or he just does this on his mano a mano on the street. He's going to be a beacon for the community for right and good in whatever small or big way he is. And I think that's kind of it, is where we as the audience mystify him and make him into this big, amazing action hero where he would laugh. He would, if he were to talk to the character, he'd probably laugh. It's like, no, I'm nothing. I'm just me. And this is what I do. That's how I read into it, is that he's just a beacon for good. And he's sexy.
and that's all of it, and that's all there is to it. I think there's one other piece that
I could watch him hunt down like abusive men all day long, and right off the bat, I just saw, oh man, there's easy sequels here of all sorts of stories that could be told about the Black community, all sorts of things that we don't know. I don't know the interesting stories that I think deserve to be told could be told, and I think John Shaft could be used, just like the character, like Along Came a Spider. The Morgan Freeman, he's the detective character that runs through the 90s and into the 2000s. I could have used maybe some of that vibe with John Shaft, but telling me maybe more Black-centered stories. I don't know. I thought there was an avenue for that, and I'm kind of sad now, looking back after 20 years, that there's only this one sequel to it in 2019 that exists for very different reasons.
Yeah. Well, let me give you some hope here as our final piece of the puzzle.
No.
So in 2014, this guy, David Walker, approached Ernest Tidyman's widow and secured the rights. He's a graphic novelist, and so he created a 6-issue miniseries comic book that depicted the early days of Shaft as a detective. And like your hoping for. It's this rare prequel that works on its own terms rather than answering questions no one asked about how he got his name or stuff like that.
Where'd he get his gun?
And just this is a quote from David Walker, because he was not into Shaft being a comedy from 2019. But
Okay.
Aside from that, he was saying, quote, "Not since the 1960s has there been more of a need for a black action hero, one that can provide a cathartic escape from life's day-to-day horrors and deliver the sort of wish fulfillment that cinema is intended to do. Not since Ernest Tidyman created John Shaft back in the 70s has there been more of a need for someone just like him."
Mm.
But just as a last little bit of the ending thing, it's like he's also often compared to James Bond in terms of, like you said, his sexiness, his suaveness,
Definitely.
his no nonsense attitude. And they were saying if James Bond can survive Moonraker and the various incarnations of crazy James Bond stuff, then surely Shaft can survive this.
Oh, well, to bring it up, I mean, the 2019 version, I did not expect it to be a comedy. And it's pretty quickly set up that it's a comedy. And it took me really off guard. It seemed to evolve as the film started presenting itself, why it exists, its thesis. That maybe perhaps a comedy is the only way to get this across. Because what the 2019 version serves to do is comment on the generational aspect of this and kind of a referendum to a degree on masculinity as a whole in the modern era, taking Shaft as its example. Does it work? I don't know. I don't love it, but I certainly understand what it's trying to do and why it was made. And I think that goes to say more than a lot of movies you might compare it to right now that would be, kind of rehashed
based on a 40-year property.
Exactly,
yeah.
So
but it's interesting to throw it on decade by decade, and it's like, check out the one from 71, check out the one from 2000, check out the one from 2019. That's like there's a 30 and a 20-year difference between them. What does that say generationally and culturally?
And that's an interesting reason to make a movie. It's been 20 years since the last one. To take that character and to talk about masculinity on a generational scale like that, really interesting. But personally, I can't recommend the 2000s ones enough. I think the film is really successful. I wish that they had seen more avenue there for more things. Maybe it was just a bit ahead of its time. Maybe that's always been the curse with Shaft. It has to bore the forefront of it, and it doesn't reap the rewards on the back end. But hey, maybe the tide's turning, because you're blowing my mind with this series. Some sort of that would be really great, because this character is fertile. I think he could not be more right.
Well, let us know if you have seen any of the Shaft movies, whether you love them, hate them, what they've done for you. Please,
what did we get wrong? Ring us over the coals.
At Illiterate Pod on Instagram is how you can reach us. We're going to be doing Black artists, creators, film, literature
all month for February.
So if you have any suggestions, please send us a message. We'd love to hear what you want to hear.
Thank you so much.